Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ivana and I love to read, and today I'm going to share my February wrap-up. So I'm not gonna lie, February was not the best mental health month for me. I honestly despise the winter time. I try my best to embrace it, but it still doesn't work out. However, I did read 11 books. Most of them are short. And as I was thinking about all the books that I've read, I realized that they fall mainly into two categories. They're either books that intrigued me or books that were just cozy. So I'm gonna share them in that category instead of doing it in chronological order. So let's get started. So starting off with intrigue, we have 4 books. Now, when I say intrigue, I don't really mean thrillers or anything like that. It's just books that made me think about life. And the first of these books is Stay With Me by bámi Adébáyọ. This book is set in 1980s Nigeria. It follows a husband and a wife, Akin and Yejide, and they have been married for many, many years and haven't had a kid yet. Yejide's in-laws are getting impatient, especially because Akin said that he would never take other wives, right? They had agreed on not having a polygamous marriage. And the fact that Yejide can't get pregnant, again, we live in a patriarchal world, and so the blame was placed on Yejide for not being able to have a child. And Akin takes a new wife. This is all in the synopsis. And Yejide gets desperate to have a kid. She wants her monogamous marriage back. She goes through desperate lengths to get pregnant. And I think you can imagine what that is. This book was really interesting. I read it in 24 hours. I actually started reading it physically, and then I turned to the audiobook because it was available through the Libby app for my library. The voice actress is wonderful. It goes back and forth between Akin and Yejide's points of views, and also you get to see the backdrop of 1980s Nigeria and all of the political upheaval and everything that was going on, in addition to all of the drama that's going on in their marriage. It was really fascinating. The actress did Yoruba really, really well, and it was just twisty, very plotty. I thought it was going to be a thriller or thriller-esque. I actually had no idea what to expect going into this, but it was really plot heavy. There was a lot of dialogue, and truly this is a portrait of a marriage. It is also very character-centered. You think about the motivations behind what both of them did. It was just really, really fascinating. Some of the questions that it brought out for me was, why are we willing to take so much shit from our parents or from our family members? I think a lot of us take for granted some things that are cultural for us that we might personally disagree with, and we might still go along with it because that's just how we were raised. We don't want to speak ill of our family. We don't want to go against tradition. The other question that it brought up for me was around childbearing and child rearing. Why do we have kids? Do people have kids because society tells them to? Do people have kids because they want someone in their likeness, someone who looks like them? I know that the conversation is more nuanced than that, but it really made me think about parenthood and why people choose it, especially after going through so much and suffering through a lot of pain and loss. This book is really heavy on the trigger warnings. I would check them out on Storygraph, as with any other book in this list. On a positive note, it also shows the persistence of parents, especially Yejide in this case. Motherhood was really challenging for her, and she was willing to go above and beyond to be a mother. It makes me wonder, is it worth it? That sounds terrible. It was just a lot. She went through a lot of pain. Yejide was such an interesting character. She was so persistent. She was a business owner. She, against all odds, had a goal and was able to achieve it for better or worse. And this book also made me think about marriage, right? A lot can change in a marriage, right? People change, and that's normal. You can marry someone and then a couple years later they're a completely different person, right? Does that mean you should stay with them? This really made me think about life. It made me think deep thoughts, and this was a really good one. And then I wrote down a quote that I tagged on my audiobook. I'm just gonna read it to you. And it is, sometimes I think we have children because we want to leave behind someone who can explain who we were to the world when we are gone. Stay With Me and Happening I talked about in my previous video when I talked about international books that I had bought. I think that I'm gonna keep making some TBR videos because it really does motivate me. Between that one and the 23 books I want to read in 2023, I have been really killing it reading the books that I set myself out to read. So this next book is a tiny. It was originally published in French in 2000 and it was translated into English in 2001, and it is Happening by Yani Ernaux. So this book is tiny but mighty. It is all about how Yani Ernaux in her 20s got an abortion when it was illegal in France. This was written decades after her illegal abortion, and she really tries, as she does in previous books, to distance herself from who she was back then so she can let go of all those emotions and kind of translate everything that happened into paper. She also wants the way that she writes to mimic how she was feeling, but the only way she can do that is if she just distances herself a little bit from it. And she has so many theories as to why it's important to share what happened to her and what she did. One of my favorite passages from this book is actually in the back, but it's one of the last things she says. And it is, maybe the true purpose of my life is for my body, my sensations, and my thoughts to become writing. In other words, something intelligible and universal, causing my existence to merge into the lives and heads of other people. I'm having a hard time sharing how I feel about this book because I really thought it was amazing. I buddy read it with Kat and Emily, and we just spent one weekend day highlighting and sharing passages to one another and voice noting each other about it. It is harrowing. Make sure that you're in the right headspace when you read this because it is very graphic. So she talks a lot about how her abortion allowed her to escape her working class background and how she was one of the first people in her family to go to college, and how she had had this abortion, she wouldn't have had any doors open for her. She wouldn't have been taken seriously by society. Most of the men that she talks to, if not all of the men that she talks to about her predicament, are awful to her. And even the ones that are politically active, even the ones that are doctors, they want nothing to do with helping her, even though at the end they applaud her for successfully completing her abortion. I tabbed the bejesus out of this, even though it's a tiny book. It's not even 100 pages. This is the first time that I actually color code my tabs. What I did was I went in like 2 weeks after I finished it and I thought about all the themes and how I wanted to categorize all of my tabs. The 4 categories that I came up with were on memory/recounting, misogyny, any passage that was thought-provoking that didn't fit into either of the other categories, and anything she said about class. And as you can see, the themes are everywhere.
Thank you, Captain Obvious.
One thing that I like about Yani Ernaux is that she's so incisive and she's so crisp in her writing, but she also has like parenthetical paragraphs throughout that kind of talk about like what she was listening to during that time or an aside. I feel like I could talk about this book for a really long time. But one other thing that struck me, especially given the fact that abortion is illegal in some parts of the United States and in many parts of the world, is that a lot of people conflate the law with morality. So if you follow the law, you're being moral. I feel like a lot of abolitionist books that I've read talk about that, and she also talks about it here. She talks about the shame of women who aborted and the disapproval of those who did not. The double standard of being a woman, right? You are shamed if you abort and you're disapproved of if you don't. But if you do get an abortion, make sure that nobody knows about it because that's going to bring about shame. And she said, as was often the case, you couldn't tell whether abortion was banned because it was wrong or wrong because it was banned. People judged according to the law, they didn't judge the law. Even though this was written 23 years ago, and even though it's about something that happened even before that, I think this is a timely book, and I think that Yani Ernaux is so worth reading, and I cannot recommend this enough. Apologies to those who read this if what I said didn't do it justice. I'm gonna be coming back to Yani Ernaux. Perhaps I'll have a vlog about her because I'm so fascinated by her writing, and I want to continue reading her entire catalog. The third intriguing book that I read was Poūkahangatus by Tayi Tibble. This is a poetry collection by a Maori woman from New Zealand. These poems talk about pop culture, they talk about mythology, and I picked this up because it was beautiful. To be honest, I didn't fully understand every poem. I was thankful that it wasn't like Insta poetry where it was just like a short poem that was like really simple. I think she had really intricate poems throughout. I think her first set of poems are all about hair, and I'm gonna read a little bit of one just to give you a taste of what her writing is like. And this is from Poūkahangatus, an essay about indigenous hair do's and don'ts. How not to be dead in a year of snakes. According to Greek mythology, according to Wikipedia, Medusa was a monster. She is generally described as a winged human female with venomous snakes in place of hair. Gazers upon her hideous face would turn to stone. However, it is less known that Medusa was a master carver, engraving her existence in bone forever. Anything else said about her is a rumor and a violent appropriation. In fact, It must be difficult not to sprout a head of snakes in a society that constantly hisses at you. There's sharp poems. There's poems about her mom. I love those poems. She has one where she likens her mom to Cindy Crawford. She has a lot of musings on modern life. She lays it all out there. I think she calls herself like a Maori demigoddess. This was just fun. I still feel like I'm figuring out poetry, so I don't feel like I'm qualified to rate this. Like, I still really enjoyed reading this, and I recommend it to anyone who wants to get their feet wet with poetry. And this last book was only intriguing because it made me think about why people write, how people write. I read Isabel Allende's El Amante Japonés, The Japanese Lover, in English. This is the third Allende that I read as an adult, and it is by far my least favorite. I read this with my friend Kat and Kat. So one half of the Bookstagram duo Long Distance Reads called Isabel Allende the Stephen King of Latin America, and I could not agree more. That's so, like, in a way it hurts my heart because I loved Eva Luna and I loved The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende, but some of her books seem very commercial as opposed to the ones that she used to write or that she started out writing. And that's totally fine. I feel like I still get a lot from Isabel Allende. I still respect Isabel Allende a lot, but this book had a lot. I honestly don't understand how a book can be so long and so plot heavy and yet so slow. And basically this follows the residents of a retirement home in addition to the workers there. None of the main characters are Latin American, which I found really interesting. And there's a lot of history here, and we have folks who have experienced the Japanese internment camps during World War II, Jewish folks who have fled their homes because of World War II. There's also other things, but they're spoilers, so I'm not gonna share. But I just felt like this was all over the place, and out of the three of us in the buddy read, I was the only one who didn't bail, and I honestly respect and do not blame my fellow buddy readers for not completing the book. What I realized that I like about Allende that she does really well is she does little girls in mansions really beautifully. I love that vibe. She also does like political upheaval really well, like in the background, because she herself experienced that in Chile. She also has really fleshed out characters. I don't know how I feel about authors taking on different perspectives from their own. I think that for Isabel Allende, as a Chilean woman who lives in the United States, who's bilingual, in order to do representation right, like you have to do a lot of research. It does sound like she did a lot of research. I think it can be really dicey when you're a person who takes on the perspective of someone in a marginalized group. I think there is a more nuanced conversation to be had about how do you do representation right, and like under which circumstances can you take on the perspective of someone who is marginalized. Like clearly she was trying and she had good intentions, but some of it felt a little iffy to me. So that's the last intriguing book. Do not recommend, but I do recommend Eva Luna and The House of the Spirits. So now we're on to cozy books, and honestly, like I really embrace the cozy book. I took my time with some of these, the ones that are not graphic novels. A lot of them are YA or young adult, and there are a few middle grade novels here. But first we're gonna start with Lonely Castle in the Mirror by Mizuki Tsujimura. And this book was translated from Japanese. It's about 7 kids who, through mirrors in their respective bedrooms, can access a castle. Basically, they try to figure out why they're there. I don't want to give too much away. There's a lot of mystery in this book. It's actually a little bit chunkier than most of my books, but I thoroughly enjoyed this. I read a little bit before bed, like for like a week and a half, and that's how I got it completed. At the end of this book, I was basically in tears, and it was just very heartfelt. I think it tackles issues of bullying, just relational things between teenagers. I also love this cover and the queen, the wolf queen, who is a tiny girl. I was really worried that having 7 different main characters would trip me up, but I feel like she did them so well. She developed all of the 7 characters. It made me want to read like Angela Carter. I want to read more like fairy tale-esque books because they do make me, I feel like they awaken the kid inside of me. Although I think Angela Carter is a little bit darker. This highlights the importance of little kindnesses and just being nice to one another. There's like that cheesy quote that's like, everybody's fighting a battle that you don't know about, so be kind. And I honestly like truthfully agree with that. I think for some people, life is a battle and people like mask it really well. And I think this is just a really sweet story for anyone who's feeling down or needs a little pick-me-up. This was definitely one of my favorites of the month. And I feel like I can't do it justice and I don't want to give anything away, but I will definitely be revisiting this one maybe next winter or maybe the following winter whenever I need to feel a little better. So that's Lonely Castle in the Mirror. The next book is also a YA book. It is Elatsoe. It also has sci-fi fantasy elements, and it is about a 17-year-old girl named Elatsoe, or Ellie, who is Lipan Apache, and one day her cousin gets murdered and he communicates with her about solving his murder because his murder is deemed an accident. So she goes into her uncle's town to try to solve his murder and to try to convince the police and everyone that he was in fact murdered. And the thing about Elatsoe is that she has special powers. She can raise the dead spirits of animals, and so she is able to use her powers for good. She's a little reckless. She honestly read like a 13-year-old more than a 17-year-old, but it was really sweet and it was really dorky and it was a little bit slow moving at times. But I love the way that she integrated her culture and her asexuality into this story. I feel like this would be a great book to read on a cold day. It really gives you cold weather vibes, even though I don't necessarily think that it was set in the winter. I think it's set in the summertime actually. But I don't know, I just got that feeling. Sometimes you want to read books that are immersive, and so this one feels really immersive, just like Lonely Castle in the Mirror. I highly recommend it for like a middle grade student. I will definitely be taking this to my classroom to recommend it to my students, and yeah, that was Elatsoe. So we're gonna do the last novel, and then we'll go to graphic novels, and it is Iveliz Explains It All by Andrea, Beatriz, Arango. This book is a middle grade novel in verse about a Puerto Rican girl. She's Puerto Rican and she's African American. She's born and raised in the United States, and she's in 7th grade, and she has some mental health issues. Her grandmother comes from Puerto Rico to stay with her and her mom after Hurricane Maria. Iveliz is really going through it. We learned that her father had passed away relatively recently, and she's using medicine, pills, to cope with that, and her grandmother is just like completely against it. And so there's like the battle of the cultures, right? Like mental health is so stigmatized in so many cultures, including Puerto Rican cultures, and so I thought that it tackled it really beautifully and with respect. I think the writing is really sweet. It's a novel in verse. I have to be honest, I wanted to read this when it came out, but Iveliz's grandmother has dementia, and that's something that I don't like to read about because of personal issues. That's why I put it off. Like, everybody has different triggers, right? But I think that it was really soothing, and it has such a nice message, and Iveliz like messes up so much and gets into so much trouble, but like she really does have good intentions. I think this book captures the impulsivity of middle schoolers, and it does it in a way that's like really sweet and very well done. You can tell Andrea has worked with kids and like really understands like the psychology of teens and tweens. I think another aspect of the book that I like is that it had illustrations and just really poetic language. Oh, it also captures going to therapy and what that's like. I think she captures that angst and she captures those feelings of helplessness, and yet there's still a positive message at the end. I also loved the friendships in this. So it was just really sweet. So now we're going to the cozy graphic novels. And my favorite one was Thieves by Lucie Bryon. This book is so French. I think it's so gorgeous. I really loved it. I think some parts of it are really funny. So let me just give you a quick synopsis before I jump into what I liked about it. So this book is originally written in French. It is about a girl named Ella who has a crush on a girl named Madeline. And Ella goes to Madeline's party, which she doesn't know it's her party, in her mansion, and steals a bunch of her stuff while she's drunk. And then she has to figure out a way to give her back all her little trinkets. Speaking of teen recklessness, I think this book captures teen recklessness really well. And there's like a scene, I'll show you somewhere on the screen, but there's a scene in this book where Ella is really drunk and has to go to the bathroom and like can't figure out where that is. And I think that Lucie Bryon does such a good job of capturing teenage stupidity, and it's just like, it was really fun and hilarious. I like read it in bed one day, like that I needed to be cheered up because the winter, and it's just so funny. It was still one of my favorites of the month, even though it wasn't like groundbreaking or anything. I thought it was just really sweet, really charming, really wild, and like adventurous, and it wasn't preachy at all. So I really highly recommend this if you're ever in the mood for something light and fluffy and just overall super cute. The next book I'm sharing I didn't really love, and I think it's my own damn fault, but it is Everything is Beautiful and I'm Not Afraid by Xiao. These are really beautiful illustrations. I'll like add some on the side so you can see them. So I picked this book up because I was at the library and I was just in the graphic novel section, and I was like, you know what? I just want to pick something that strikes my fancy, something that looks sweet, something that's going to cheer me up. I don't want to check Goodreads. I don't want to check Storygraph. I just want to pick up something random and not be swayed by anyone. And so I picked this up. I mistakenly thought it was a memoir, and it's not. It's a collection of like little comics about mental health and queerness, about being an immigrant in the United States. It talks a lot about belonging or wanting to belong. I think that the themes were really interesting. I just think that this is not a graphic novel because it's very disjointed. It's just like different thoughts. And some of the thoughts are really beautiful and the art is amazing, but some of the things that was said there were really cliche. So I almost feel like the illustrator could have worked or with a writer. So like just to tighten up some of what was being said and to not have it be redundant. But it was still really sweet. I still really enjoyed all of the illustrations and some of the thoughts that were shared. The next book I read was Delicates, which is the sequel to Sheets. This is Wendell. He died when he was really young, and he works in a laundromat with his alive friend Marjorie. And Marjorie really, really wants to be popular, and she is failing at being popular, and she meets this girl named Eliza who is here. And Eliza likes to photograph ghosts. That's like her thing. And Eliza kind of discovers Wendell. Marjorie is like struggling between being with the cool kids and being friends with Eliza. I love this so much more than Sheets. Like many of the other books I talked about, this book captures being a teen and wanting to fit in so freaking well. I also love her facial expressions. Like the art is like pastel. It's very, very gorgeous. And she just captures all of the facial expressions of like the mean girls and even like the dorky girls really, really well. I just think it had really good messages about fitting in, and I'm just gonna read you 2 pages and I'll like show them on the side. So there's this thing called the Latin image. It's the image on the film or print that has been exposed to light but not developed yet. It's there, but you can't see it, like a ghost image. There's a sort of magic to making it appear. Not like Alakazam magic. It's like the darkness is hiding. All it takes is light and chemicals and patience to make it appear. Humans have hidden darkness too, like secrets and sadness. But you can't just stick a person in developer fluid, can you? I feel like there's a lot of metaphors. I also really love this, and I do want to revisit it. And the last cozy book I read was Udon Noodle Soup, Little Tales for Little Things. I read this book on the train while I was going back and forth to the nail salon on a Sunday. And it just it just soothed my soul. It's so cute. So it's a collection of short stories. This one is about a couple that breaks up. The person who leaves takes the person who stays behind's toothbrush and leaves his own, and then she like reminisces about that toothbrush and their time together. There's one in the end called Apollo's Soccer Shirt, and it's all about falling in love with a boy who has it all and who's like really sporty and like a god basically, and the shit we take from the people that we like and learning to grow from that. There's one about a mother and daughter, and the mother likes to knit her daughter's sweaters and she like just does not appreciate her mom at all. It is like literally like chicken soup for the soul, and it's written by a Chinese-German author and illustrator. It was just really, really sweet. I really recommend this. I wish my library had it. I'm glad that I got it from the comic book store. And it's just making me think of all the other books in the comic book store that are not in the library that I should have read, so I want to read more graphic novels. I think one thing is like the last story was a little bit longer than the rest, so there was inconsistencies with like how long they were. I feel like that's normal. And then there were a few errors in English that should have been corrected, so I think it could have been better edited. But overall, this was really nice, and honestly, like out of all the books I read, this was like my favorite art. It's just really gorgeous. Those are the books I read in February. I read intriguing books, I read cozy books, I thought a lot about life. I was miserable, but I still was able to pretty much read consistently. March is a mixed bag so far. So I'm hoping that I have better luck this month. And if not, there's always April and the spring. I'm gonna come back with more sit down videos, but I have some vlogs in the works. Let me know what you read in February and what your favorite books were. Let me know if you're interested in any of the books that I talked about or if you read them and have any other thoughts on them. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you've made it this far, I hope you have a lovely day and I hope we can connect in the comments. Peace!